Going to see this was my first time back in a movie theater in almost a year and a half. Now, to be clear, it wasn't exactly a standard movie-going experience. I'm still not entirely sure about my comfort level with a full theater. I went to a matinee. There were 2 other human beings in there. It was easy to social distance. I felt better about that. But Shang Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Latest Marvel film, and very much a different kind of thing. This has been the first Marvel film in a while that feels properly standalone. There's really only a couple of continuity nods, and only one which feels like it would have actually helped if you'd seen a specific earlier film. I won't say what one. I'll section off when I get into spoilers, and I'll give you a heads up. But even that gets explained within the body of this one. So even if you didn't see the one film that they actually do a bit of reference to, you will still be able to follow this fine. This is very self-contained and a pretty strong piece overall, I have to say. First off, props to the cast, pretty much across the board. They're all good. The leads are good, the side characters are good, the villain, surprisingly good. Not that I necessarily expected a junk villain, but Marvel's track record on villains it's up and down. Sometimes they get it really well, but a lot of the times the villains, especially in things that are meant to be the first appearance of things, villains tend to not register that much. I mean, think of the villains in things like Doctor Strange, Ant-Man, first Guardians of the Galaxy even. They're not particularly memorable. This is a really interesting villain who, the way that he is approached is quite interesting as well. I'm going to avoid talking too much about the plot until I get into the spoiler section. I will say, if I'm being honest, Aquafina was probably the highlight for me, and I kind of want to dissect that a little bit, because the thing is, looking at Aquafina's career and what she does as a performer, she's basically brought in to bring a very specific type of comedic energy pretty much every time. The thing is, as a general rule, I don't care for that very much. You know, people for some reason, leaping to the front of my head is someone like Melissa McCarthy. But, someone who's basically brought in just to do this one thing that they do, and do well in most cases, but that's always what they're going to be doing every time you see them. That tends to get old for me real quick. And I can think of older examples from when I was younger, actors who eventually branched off. But Jim Carrey always played the same kind of thing. And I liked it at the time because I was 10. But, now not looking back and going, God, that got old and repetitive. And that's kind of how I tend to feel about these sorts of careers. Aquafina manages to dodge that with me. And I'll admit part of it might just be, for whatever reason, I'm not sick of her yet. But I think there's something more to it than that. And I think what it is within the films where she still brings that very specific energy, that very sort of, high energy, a little bit shouty, what the hell kind of thing that she does, she doesn't do that for her entire time on screen. She does, and I don't know if it's just that she gets better writing or if she just knows to do this as a performer, but she does dial it back and doesn't inject it into scenes that wouldn't benefit from that. So there are scenes where she can go quieter and you can believe that she's a human being, where this is a facet of her personality as opposed to just the latest caricature of what this performer always plays. So not only does she continue to work for me, I really, really like her. I think she brings a great energy to this that really livens up the whole thing quite a bit. I'm trying to think what else I can talk about. Oh, I want to talk about the action scenes a little bit, because they were good, they weren't great. I had slightly higher hopes for the action scenes. They are inventive. The fights are well choreographed, well thought out, well executed. It's the filming is the problem. Now, I'm not going to go so far as to say that the shooting style ruins it. It doesn't. But I do think that the shooting style does take away from what I wanted out of these fights. I mean, for me, the appeal of a martial arts film is, the the choreographed fights, especially where you can get two performers fighting each other that are really good at what they do, and you can get longer takes and not so many cuts and not so many jumping perspective from here to here, and you see the throw start and then you cut here to the ground and you see the landing, and part of that's there to cover, so that they didn't have to do it in one. And but doing it in one is what is great about most of the really great martial arts films. And I really wanted that here, and I didn't get it. Now, again, I don't want to play up it too much as a fault because, you don't, but you could, in theory, watch the Netflix Iron Fist for an example of the worst possible way to do this, which is heavy cuts, bad lighting, angles that just are awkward and are clearly done to show that they're clearly done to cover the fact that they're using a fight double instead of the actor because the actor sucks in the action. So, it's none of that, but there were a lot of scenes where, something would start and I'd be like, don't cut, and it would cut, and I'd be like, oh, just, I wish that there were just 20% fewer cuts in the fights in terms of shots jumping from one to the other. And that might have hit the sweet spot. It's not far off from where I wanted it, but it's kind of like the Uncanny Valley thing. The closer you get to what I want, the more I notice how much you're falling short. So my thoughts on the action scenes are unfortunately slightly disappointed, but they are still quite good. The hits hit hard. The action is, as I said, it's well choreographed, and the performers all sell the action very, very well. So it's good. I had hoped for something specific that I didn't get. And maybe that's on me in terms of the baggage and the expectation I brought to the film. I don't know. The other thing that I'll say before I get into anything related to spoilers is that I will say that this feels, from my uneducated, very white perspective, this feels like a showing and an appreciation of a culture without getting too, cliched about it. It feels like it delves into aspects of not only Chinese culture, but Chinese American culture and what that experience is, in a way that doesn't feel like it's fetishizing or exoticizing or treating as a joke, any of it. And the feel, again, not knowing if this is the case, but it feels like a more genuine version of the things that get stereotyped. And this feels more akin to the more realistic, but more reverent and respectful aspects that those stereotypes and cliches are based off of. So that's the feel of it. And maybe it genuinely is that, or maybe it's simply less into the stereotypes and cliches than other things, so for someone who doesn't know better, it feels fresh. I don't know which is the case. But it did work for me, and I never felt particularly awkward or cringing over the depictions of culture or the life of these characters. I mentioned that it does also single out sort of the Asian American experience in particular, and there's a really great moment that's a nod to that at a few points, sort of acknowledging there's the names these characters go by, living in America, and then there's their actual name that they were given when they were born, and that they aren't the same thing, that they've just Americanized and that's expected of them and they've just done it. And that's the kind of thing I mean in terms of touches that feel like it's like somebody knew what they were talking about. Whether it was a writer, director, performers, or all of the above, I don't know. Or maybe nobody knew what they were talking about, and I'm just not spotting the cliches that I usually see. And so I don't realize that this is also not good. I have no idea what the case is, but it felt well handled to my uneducated eyes. I am going to need to try and start to get into spoilers a little bit, because I need to talk about some of the story aspects. I want to talk more about the villain, absolutely, and a bit about the ending. Again, overall, I will say this was good. This was solid. I have nitpicks, none about the performances. I'll be really excited to see pretty much all of these characters again. I think everybody who I saw in here, I'm like, I would be happy for you to show up again. Every last one of you. So this is a really good, I would actually say, is one of the better first entries and introduction pieces for a Marvel character. Yeah, so that's what I will say about that. So, that having been said, we shall now begin to explore spoilers a bit. So, I found myself thinking earlier on, almost kind of wishing that they had done a tournament structure to this, because I feel like Shang Chi is a character who really would lend himself to that. But by the time it was getting towards the end and we get to the hidden land where his mother came from, I forgive me for not even bothering trying with a lot of names. I actually am recording this several days after having seen it, so names are already starting to escape me. They're not my strong point anyways. But when they get there and sort of seeing the mystical elements of this and the very unique, wonderfully colorful feel to that, I'm like, okay, a tournament movie wouldn't have given me that probably. So I really did start to appreciate more what it was and less what I wanted it to be. I still have my niggles about the action scenes, but talked about that already. So let's talk about the villain, which is Shang-Chi's father. And I'm not really going to call him the Mandarin, but that is acknowledged because that's effectively, in terms of a parallel from the comics, that's who this guy is. He is the possessor of the 10 rings. Oh, and the way the rings are realized is really cool, because in the comics it's just 10 rings on his finger and they just do different magic stuff. The way the rings are done and visualized here is actually really cool. I really dug the heck out of that. But him having the motivations that he does is something that, it's funny, it's hard for me to nail down exactly why this works so well for me. Because on paper, this should annoy me. On paper, it should, for the sorts of things that tend to just not work for me, it should annoy me that a villain got better because of love, and then it fell completely apart after that love was gone. I've railed before against the idea of, love saving somebody, that the love of another person completed someone or anything along those lines. But this doesn't really feel like it's doing that. It does feel like she was what made him be better. And even after she was gone, while he backslid, he did try to not completely become who he was before. He was lacking his compass, and the introduction of the voices egging him on in the worst direction, this sort of external influence. So it's not just a matter of, well, if she's not there, he's going to be his worst self. No, he still needs someone to nudge him back to be as bad as he was. And that worked for me really well. And the way they handled his motivations and how it really wasn't a case of, now I'm just that horrible thing I was before, and so I'm gonna go back to finding this hidden land and taking it over like I planned originally. No, he's going back for a completely different purpose, a false purpose, lied to him, but he is now motivated differently. He is now motivated, somewhat selfishly, but not exclusively selfishly. He's trying to help. He needs back what he lost, as opposed to how we get the sense of him that we get from the prologue, which is just very, I can conquer it, so I will. It's my right because I can. And he had surprising depth, and especially his scenes with his kids. Shang-Chi's sister, she was pretty good. She felt slightly underutilized, which I feel like the film kind of hung a lampshade on when Michelle Yeoh, who was awesome, because she's always awesome, hands her a weapon and goes, time to step out of the shadows. I'm like, yeah. Not that she was completely sidelined, but honestly, the thing is, structurally, in terms of how the plot works, she has just as much right to main character status as Shang-Chi does, but just isn't, because he's the established character from the comics that we're working with. But, from any actual sense of why is he the main character, everything that would make him the main character, she also has, or has an equivalent of. So there is no reason for her to be secondary really at all. So any amount does feel a little bit but she's still quite good. I like the sort of fighting ring that she's got, and that was a great cameo from Wong, who was just. I just love this guy's attitude, this mix of, he's taking everything so seriously, but at the same time, he's like, just got this slight edge of, this is Tuesday for me. And then giving us also the Abomination, establishing he's still around. That was fun. I enjoyed that. But okay, I need to talk about the one thing that ties back in fairly directly with the Marvel Universe, and that is tying into Trevor Slattery, aka the fake Mandarin from Iron Man 3. This was honestly brilliant. So first of all, Ben Kingsley, he clearly has so much fun playing this character. And I love the idea that, he was just hired to what he thought was play a part. Turns out he's faking being a terrorist from someone who actually is a terrorist. And that, again, a really good lampshade hanging on this idea that he was just this amalgamation of quote unquote foreign and, scary other cliches. And they called him the Mandarin. What? And so I love that Shang-Chi's dad, flat out goes how ridiculous was that they stole my accomplishments in the name of my organization and created that nonsense. And then we have Trevor actually show up and sort of connect the dots a little bit and just honestly not contribute that much to the plot. I mean, functionally, he helps get them to this hidden land and all of that. But he is just a new comic relief character when we've already got a perfectly serviceable one. But his energy, his comic relief energy, is so much different to Aquafina's. I didn't feel like we had comic relief overload. He was a lot of fun, him coming in. The one other thing that I feel like I get why it's there, but I'm also like, is the actual climax. So we have the combat between the Army of the Ten Rings and the residents of this place, and we have the confrontation between Shang-Chi and his dad, which is all very emotionally resonant stuff. These are characters who we've seen, we've gotten to know. But then ultimately, the climax is primarily a big CGI dragon fighting a big CGI Lovecraftian monstrosity. And I get it. When you've given this thing a backstory that involves a dragon and a Lovecraftian horror, it would kind of be cheap not to give us those things. The problem is those things aren't a payoff to the emotional core of the film. The confrontation between Shang-Chi and his dad, that is a payoff to the emotional core of the film. And so after that, having another 10, 15 minutes, whatever it is, of CGI monsters battling it out, that is not contributing to the emotional climax of the story. So unfortunately, the gap in time between the emotional climax and the action climax, and I'm not saying those always have to happen one right after the other, but when your emotional climax is also an action climax, because it involves Shang-Chi fighting his father, to then have a whole other action climax that lacks the emotional resonance, just kind of feels like padding out the runtime. Again, though, I'm not sure there was a way around that without ditching the entire dragon, soul-eating horror backstory. Because, like I said, if you're going to set that up, people kind of want it. Because I remember how ticked off I was when they spent the entire season building up a dragon in Iron Fist and never, ever gave it to us. Anyways. But even after that, it did pick up the pieces pretty well in terms of final resolutions, mid-credit sequence, and all of that. So, yeah, I enjoyed this. I thought this was pretty dang good, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more of these characters. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. You've seen it. What do you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. I got a Patreon. That is how I pay my bills. And any amount you are able to contribute is of great help. But no pressure there. Take a relaxed attitude around here, so just come on back next time you need a break.